These are the best and worst weapons in Apex Season 21. Now, unfortunately, we didn't see a ton of weapon changes in these patch notes, but the weapon meta is still pretty interesting besides a few weapons. So let's get right into it. And it wouldn't be a weapons tier list without me starting off D tier with the P2020. This gun is not good. It becomes a little bit better with the hammer points, and it probably would move into the C tier range. But yeah, this thing just sucks. And when you compare it to all of the other weapons, it's clearly the worst one. Moving up the list into C tier, we're going to start it off with the RE45. Now, the RE is like a mini R9. Pretty easy to use, but it just doesn't output a ton of damage, and it's obviously limited to very close range encounters. It's definitely more along the lines of a starter gun. You get it off drop. Killing someone with white armor is obviously much easier and feels much better than later game when they're on purple or red armor. However, if you're able to find the hammer points, once again, it obviously makes the weapon better, but keep in mind they did remove the digital threat this season. So last season, it kind of had a little bit of an edge because it could have the digi threat, and if you had the hammer points and a magazine, it could combat Bangalore or play really well with Bangalore's smoke, but that won't be happening this season. C tier for now. Next in C tier is the charge rifle. I am moving it up a tier from last season. They did improve its ADS recoil. I have used it a little bit. It's still an awkward weapon to use, but certainly can be strong if you're able to land a shot. The problem is you need players exposed for a fairly long amount of time to get that shot off because it takes longer to charge this gun up. I think it's a better weapon on mouse and keyboard than it is on controller. So yeah, you can still headshot someone and down them, but it's not going to be a weapon I'm going to run a lot in Season 21. Third in C tier is the G7 Scout. Now, this weapon currently feels like the weakest marksman right now. The recoil on it is pretty steep. It's very limited when players get to be too far away, whereas some of the other marksmans don't really feel that. It's not a great gun you're going to want to swap to up close. So for that, I'm putting it in C tier. Fourth on the list is the longbow. And now they did buff the longbow. They removed the barrel stabilizer and included basically the purple barrel in its base. So basically what it was last season with the purple barrel, now that's the base on the longbow. They removed the skull piercer. But here's the thing with the longbow, right? It's definitely better than last season, but with the wingman on the floor, you get the pistol strafe speed, and with the wingman, you're only going to hit for 10 less damage to the body. You can shoot it faster as well, and it's just way more dynamic. I just don't see the case to make the longbow any higher than C tier right now. Is it better than last season? Yeah, sure. But with the wingman on the floor loot, this changes where I would have ranked the longbow. If the wingman stayed in the package, I might have left the longbow in B tier, but if you're already in that sniper class, wingman is better. Now, I know some people are going to say the wingman's different. It's not actually a sniper, and the longbow's better at long range. And yeah, it is. But a lot of fights in Apex just don't last that long at a long range. They may begin there, and then they inevitably get closer. So longbow's very limited. Lastly, in C tier, I've got the R99. I put this weapon in C tier last season. Some players disagreed, but look, this gun has been nerfed way too hard. I wish they never would touch the recoil of some of these weapons when it's really not the necessary change to make. However, with that said, they have, and it didn't receive any changes this season, but it's very weak. Now, you get it fully kitted with the purple mag and stuff, probably is a better gun than a C tier weapon, but that's an if, right? And I factor all of these aspects into the gun when I rank it. You get an R9 off drop, I don't know, it just feels really weak. Up close, you're probably going to one clip someone if you're used to the new recoil pattern, but beyond that, it's very limited. So that wraps up C tier. We're going to move on to B tier. Starting off B tier, I've got the Rampage. Not really sure what to do with the Rampage. It feels like a very awkward gun. It's never a gun that I seek out for. If I pick it up off drop, I may run with it for the first fight or two, but it's not going to be a weapon that I run all game. If you charge it up with the thermite, it can be very strong, but its limitations are its overall slow fire rate, its weird recoil pattern at times. Like, there will be times where I swear I should be hitting this player and it's doing an outline around their body. It's just a weird gun, and with that slow fire rate, missing some shots can be critical and can just make you wind up losing that fight altogether. So it feels like too much risk for the reward. But with that said, I'm perfectly content with it being where it is in this tier list because we've seen it be meta and it wasn't a fun time. Next in B tier is the Mozambique. This thing is like the budget wingman. We saw a lot of it in the ALGS, and part of that was because of Bangalore, and you could still equip a digital threat to it. And while you can't do that this this season, it's still a really strong pistol. It's not going to be super strong throughout the game, but I'll tell you, in the solos mode, if you find a purple Mozam, you get that hammer point, that purple bolt, this thing is beaming. 3 or 4 shots, you're downing a player easily. And 3 or 4 shots will come out really, really quickly with the purple bolt. It's crazy to think how much better the Mozam is compared to the P20, but that's a whole different story. Third in B tier is the 3030. They removed the skull piercer, as I said, with the longbow, so this is a slight nerf to it. And as we know, the 3030 was nerfed pretty heavily last season, but it's still a middle of the road weapon. It's good at those longer ranges. Up close, it's not necessarily a weapon you're going to want to swap to, but if you need to finish an enemy off with 1 or 2 shots, it can get the job done. And I think it's better than the scout when it comes to that job. But the biggest difference with the 3030 is that when you're able to charge up those shots, the damage output just scales so much higher than something like the G7. So I still think it's a strong pick this season, but it's not in the meta necessarily. Fourth, I've got the Sentinel. Sentinel still feels like the strongest sniper, the true sniper, I guess. I'm not including the wingman here when I say that, but charging this gun up, 88 to the body, 132 to the head, it's just insane. Pretty easy to use. I mean, easier than the longbow or the charge rifle, and very satisfying as well. The limitation is the lower magazine size, but I still think it's a really strong weapon. And if you want to run long range, can't go wrong with the Sentinel. Fourth is the Car. Now, I know some players may think the Car is just as bad as the R9. While I slightly agree, I've got it in B tier. Feels a little bit better than the R9. And I think a huge reason for that is just the recoil doesn't feel as inconsistent as the R99. And maybe that's just me. I was so used to the R9 before, and then they changed it. But I don't know. They did change around the recoil with the Car last season. They didn't admit to it at the beginning of the season, but then it later came out. But they're probably very comparable when it comes to the SMGs right now. Not very strong, but it's decent as a secondary. All right, next is the L-Star, and I can't really get a good feel on this weapon. At times, I'll get annihilated by a player with an L-Star and think, is this gun like S tier? And then there are other times when I use it and it feels very inconsistent, just like other LMGs, where it's outlining the body of the player while I'm up close, barrel stuffing them in the hip fire range. There's no doubt it packs a punch, and the fact that you never really have to reload the weapon if you're experienced with using it is definitely an asset, but I don't know. I feel like B tier is a very fair placement for it right now. Second to last in B tier is the Spitfire. This gun saw no changes. It's a decent gun. It's not amazing. LMGs are kind of just in this weird spot where they're either pretty good or not that good, and I think the Spitfire is just right around that range. For me, if I'm picking it up, I'm usually looking to transition from it to an R301, but if you get a fully kitted one, bruiser, barrel, all of that stuff, the fact that you get 50 plus bullets in the mag is definitely something not to mess with. So, all right, if I'm gonna run an LMG on the floor loot, I probably will go with the Spitfire or the L-Star, but definitely not the Rampage. Lastly, wrapping up B tier is the Triple Take. Now, the Triple Take did get the boosted loader added to it this season. Of course, if you can find it, or if you find the gold Triple Take. Triple Take is strong. It's really user-friendly. Like, any level of player can use this weapon and I think find some success with. One of the better parts about this gun is that it can sort of flex up close in that close range shotgun encounter if you got to swap to it, whereas some of the other marksmen or snipers just flat out can't. So that's what the Triple Take has going for it compared to the others, but it does have an inconsistency in its damage because of the built-up choke in it and charging up the shots. You know, you first might open the fight with an 80 shot, but then subsequent shots are 21s or 19s, and that's when it becomes rather frustrating to use. But overall, if you're new to the game or you really want an easy weapon to use, the Triple Take is your best option. All right, now moving into A tier, these are some of the best weapons that you're going to want to look out for this season. First up is the Flatline. I'm sure a lot of you are psyched if you got the Flatline skin that they put in the challenges from last season. It's definitely an awesome skin. But yeah, this gun is still really strong. Of course, the limitations are its hip fire. At times, I swear it's just a randomized recoil pattern. But mid-range, it packs a punch, and a lot of players like using it, especially once they learn to control the recoil of it. And yeah, I think A tier is a perfect placement for it. Second in A tier is the Wingman. Now, this came out of the care package and is onto the floor loop. The difference is there are no extended sniper mags, and it can only take the boosted loader. The boosted loader will make it have 8 shots if you get that fast reload, and this thing is still really strong despite the nerfs that they made to it. 45 to the body, 86 to the head, a very fast fire rate. They said to have nerfed the hip fire, but I haven't found any meaningful change to it. I still feel like it's pretty good in that hip fire range. You know, it's definitely high risk, high reward. You miss a couple shots, you might not end up downing a player who's on purple armor, but still, body, headshot, you've got a player on purple armor to 1 HP. So you'll see a lot of it, and a lot of sweats love running it. So A tier for now. Third is the Mastiff. Mastiff is a strong shotgun right now. If you're looking for a close range gun that packs a punch, you can't go wrong with the Mastiff. I do think there is one other shotgun that's better. Well, I guess 2 shotguns that are better, but the Mastiff is still really strong. 4th is the R301. Some players may think A tier is too high, but they did buff the hip fire on it last season, and it feels a little bit more consistent up close. Look, it's still a very easy weapon to use, whether that's mid-range, close range, or even somewhat long range. Are there ARs that are better than it? Yeah, absolutely. But you can still get the job done with the 301 for sure. 5th is going to be the Volt. Now, the Volt is one of the stronger SMGs this season. It was last season as well. Another weapon that's pretty user-friendly. It doesn't have a steep recoil pattern. It's not as good as it is in that mid-range as it used to be because they altered the projectile speed of the bullets and that sort of stuff. But energy weapons are overall pretty strong right now, so using a Volt as a secondary is definitely a viable strategy. All right, next in A tier, I have the Alternator. While this might be somewhat of a high placement, having a disruptor on it, having a gold alternator this season is going to be really, really strong. You know, is it as good as the Volt? No, definitely not, but I'm still putting it in A tier because it feels a little bit better than a B tier weapon. The downsides are obviously the slower fire rate, but that can also be an asset for a lot of players because they're not good at controlling the recoil. The Alternator is very user friendly when it comes to that because of that slow fire rate. So same thing to make you laugh, make you cry. If you go against a faster shooting weapon, you miss a few of your shots with the Alternator, you're definitely going to lose it, and that's really where it gets outclassed. But overall, still a pretty strong weapon. All right, second to last in A tier is the Nemesis. I probably could make a case for this still being an S tier weapon, which is kind of crazy, but it just doesn't feel like it's as good as it once was, and that's okay because it came out really strong. I still run this gun all the time because if you get a 3x and a barrel and a mag and all that, I mean, it's just tough to beat a Nemesis. The fast fire rate when it ramps up, the damage output of the burst, the limited recoil at mid-range, I mean, this gun still is amazing. As I said, it's not as good, and that's why I don't have it in S tier, but if you're looking to run a weapon that can flex in that mid to long range, but also if you need to use it close range, Nemesis is probably one of the best options this season. Wrapping up A tier is the Prowler. No changes to the Prowler this season, still a really strong burst weapon. I mean, burst guns right now are just still dominating the meta in my opinion. Probably a little bit better on controller, but it's one of the best secondaries you can have. And that wraps up A tier. Moving on to the best of the best, S tier. Now I'm going to categorize all of the care package weapons as just one in the S tier class because, I mean, they're care package weapons for a reason and they buff the crap out of all of them. I will say the EVA 8 is better than it was at the beginning of last season. They made some changes to it and overall it's stronger than it was. I didn't really know if it was completely S tier at the beginning of last season, but I let you guys decide and most of you voted S tier, but now it's definitely S tier. However, the newly added Devotion into the care package is insane. Now a gold Devo last season was already really good. The problem was finding all the attachments along with the turbo to make it that viable weapon. However, now it's in the care package. Do not leave one of these behind. This thing rips. It is insanely fast firing. I mean, you could literally down a whole team with one mag. It's that strong. So don't sleep on the Devo. As far as the ground loot weapons in S tier, I've got the Peacekeeper starting it off. If you've played the solos mode, every single player is running a Peacekeeper. I mean, 99 pumps up close are just insane. I think it's a little bit better than the Mastiff because it doesn't feel as limited without a shotgun bolt. Not to mention, you can slap a disruptor on the PK still, and it's got to be the best secondary to run in my opinion, as long as you're decent with shotguns. So S tier for now. Next in S tier is the Hemlock, and despite some of the nerfs that they made to it last season, this gun is still insanely strong. Once again though, it's a burst weapon, right? And these burst guns are just so hard to balance it seems, or they just want them to be meta. So whatever it is, the Hemlock is definitely one of the best ARs to run, and it's also pretty good up close. They did try to nerf the hip fire last season, but I haven't noticed a huge difference with it. So if you're looking for that mid to long range weapon, Hemlock is awesome. And lastly, wrapping up S tier, some of you will be happy to hear this, some of you won't be, but I've got the Havoc. Last season, I definitely downplayed how good the Havoc was. Part of that was because, well, the meta can change and it's not always the same at the beginning of the season as it is at the end, and that was true for the Havoc. The Havoc is insanely problematic right now. Every single player is running it in solos. The hip fire is, I don't even know, it's insane. But the damage output and just how fast that damage comes at you is head scratching. I was really, really surprised they didn't nerf it, and I'll be really, really surprised if they don't nerf it halfway through the season. But for now, I mean, it's an S tier weapon, and that's even with or without the turbocharger. Like, you don't even need the turbocharger for this gun to be insanely strong, which is just crazy. Another factor is the recoil is pretty easy to control, especially in that close to mid range, and that's really where this gun dominates. You're not going to get that range that you will from the Hemlock or the Nemesis on the Havoc unless you're cheating, but this gun is definitely going to be in the meta until they change it. Let me know your comments down below, and if you're interested in the best and worst legends, like covering covered it all in this video here. Thanks for watching. Peace.